welcome to everyone, and sincere thanks to Sinead O'Reilly and the Arts Council's Places Matter team for the invitation and opportunity to present here in visual, well, it's not visual, it's St Patrick's College, but part of visual, with artist activist Kate O'Shea and Enya Moore in Australia. I'm Siobhán Geoghegan. I'm the director of Common Ground, which is a small arts organisation based in Inchicore in Dublin 8. Before I start, I'd like to briefly introduce artist Kate O'Shea, who's currently this Just City Counter-Narrative Neighbourhood Residency Awardee with Common Ground since 2020, up until now. And Enya Moore, who's in Australia, who curated Networks of Solidarity with Kate in 2021. After my presentation, staying with the local and acting with resilience, both Kate and Enya will present together. I just want to describe Kate and Enya's background and practices. So Kate is a multidisciplinary social practice artist. She works across printmaking, large-scale installation, performance and publishing. Her collaborative practice builds spaces of solidarity to explore alternative modes of community and dialogue. And Kate's collaborative practice is based on building spaces of solidarity and dialogue that explore alternatives to the social relations of capitalism. Enya Moore writes, researches and teaches on Gadigal country in Sydney, Australia. Enya studied art and craft in Cork and metalwork and art and design history in NCAD in Dublin. And she also studied design cultures in VU Amsterdam. She's currently completing a PhD at the University of Technology in Sydney on transnational design events in the political design economy. She teaches, lectures and coordinates design subjects at the School of Design in UTS. And her writing has been published in journals such as Design and Culture, Design Issues, Plots, and the Australasian Journal of Popular Culture. Kate O'Shea's project, How Much Is Enough, is a response to Common Ground's The Just City Counter-Narrative Award, 2020 to 22. Her socially engaged practice and collaborators work within fluid and emergent social practices in Ireland, across Europe, America, and Australia. Kate began her award in March 2020 as Ireland went into its first COVID-19 lockdown. And in response, Kate set up the Just City Collective, an online reading group. From January to July, Kate and Enya Moore in 2021, supported by ourselves and Create, planned and hosted Networks of Solidarity, a series of online talks that aim to strengthen transnational networks of solidarity and deepen awareness of place-based struggles from Dublin 8 to Gadigal country in Sydney. It included presentations and performances from invited artists, activists, community workers, designers, academics, researchers, writers, and filmmakers. And just before I move on, I want to acknowledge my connection to the changing town of Carlow and its hinterland. I spent many a childhood summer in this town, and my family come from North Kilkenny. And both London and that hinterland shaped me. And I think of all the women I know who worked in Brawn. I said I wouldn't do this. And the Air Foods and the Sugar Factory, and how they all economically supported many, many rural households, including my family's. So, Common Ground operates in a hyper-local context, and it has been working since 1999 as a local arts organisation in a complex, changing inner-city area of Dublin 8, from Rialto up to Inchicore and back down again. Since our establishment, we have formed relationships with artists and communities through partnerships, working through collective responses to issues of spatial and social justice, communities of care, housing development, climate change, ecology, and the urban environment, and now the impact of COVID-19. Where we're located is well developed and has a sophisticated community and youth development matrix in the area. This both challenges us, as it should, and sets rigorous debate and questions about how and why we work together. We're a learning arts organisation, and we recognise and respond to the complex landscape and interface we're sited in. And as part of that, we chose to use the twin methodologies and practices of engaged art practice and community development. The reality is it's slow work. It's not well funded. It explores issues of power, conflict, and tension, all of which are central to the reality of all collective creative processes. Our place-based arts practices continue to emerge and develop, and when we understand them to reveal ongoing, unpredictable, multiple dialectics between power and resistance, art and activism, all in a sited place. We work in a contested landscape, and if you can look at the slides that are running behind me, there is a map, and you will see the former St. Michael's Estate, where we have near us Kilmainham Jail, Richmond Barracks, where all the British Army came in the former colonial times. And I suppose as time moved on and the Republic was built, housed St. Michael's Estate, and I suppose many people would look at it as a contested landscape where it had consequently developed social and economic neglect. And just for today, I'd like to signpost you to a blog series by the MA in Spatial Justice in Maynooth that's been posted daily, and it gives a wider context to that work, and it's called Eye on the World. So working in partnership with academia for us has brought a new rigor to our interdisciplinary practices, and it expands our sense of how we work and who we connect with and how we all connect with each other beyond Dublin 8. And this includes the School of Geography in Maynooth and UCD, who've brought more rigor to our conversations, relationships with artists, groups of place and interest. Common Ground emerged from a background of political government structures in the 90s, when the Irish government was working in partnership with the EU to secure development funds, which were intended to support and eradicate long-term employment and social and economic issues, such as poor quality housing, early school leaving, and significant drug use. We grew out of a piece of research called 2020 Vision, which was written by the Canal Communities Partnership and involved local activists, community development projects, and activists. That funding came from ERDF funds, and it was to secure, I suppose, and sustain short-term programs that had grown over the years, and to acknowledge the growth of projects like Rialto Youth Project with Wet Paint Arts, IMA and the Family Resource Centre, and projects like Unspoken Truths and Once Is Too Much. And since 1999, it's fair to say that our broad set of values were founded on social justice, critical reflection, asking rigorous questions about education, equality, housing, forming alliances, dissent and resistance, and of course, making art. So places and connection, places and care, places and power, and who controls the message. Specific to this conference is the proposition, places matter. For us, it would be places and why they matter, and how can we influence those who manage them. And I'm interested in how Valerie posited that this morning, you know, the bold fire inspectors. Places are complex, they carry memory and history. And where we are based signifies that hugely. And many years ago, I brought a Dutch curator to St. Michael's Estate and showed him Tales from the Promised Land, which you'll see coming up behind me. And when I described the site, he was like, it's a guilty landscape. And it's interesting because I suppose it does, as I said before, encompass much of the history of Ireland. At this moment, I'd like us all to think about labours of care that go into repairing and reimagining our communities, our places, and in our work as an arts organisation, and with the artists, groups and activists we work with. Silvia Frederici describes creating feminist commons entails struggle and hard work, but the result might teach the importance of community building, those of liberation and solidarity, of awakening and care, and multi-species relations of social, ecological repair and regeneration. This reminds me of our work and how we stay with the trouble, as do many others we work with and know. Where we are located, there are always macro and micro challenges. The reality is you can't have places without people, and how you engage and communicate is crucial to ownership and care of that place. For us, it's the people who make the place, and they do matter. At the moment, Dublin 8 faces ongoing visible challenges and changes to its physical landscape as an area of continuous redevelopment. These are the realities of slow or failed regeneration of flat complexes, the development of extensive new cost rental and rent-only housing, and the advent of the new Children's Hospital. This all brings new people, facilities and resources to the area, and many people feel displaced as the area changes rapidly, while others see these changes as an opportunity to create a more demographically and ethnically diverse community. As the community and neighbourhoods adjust to this massive transformation, making space for the arts and creative activities are crucial in encouraging community participation and connectedness. And some of you might remember the ACE report from the 80s, where Kieran Benson writes about art as a way of living and as a means of power. He draws the question of who controls or possesses power, and this is a central question that Common Ground comes back to in our work again and again. It is also central to planning and spatial development. So places as sites of resistance, resilience, making and engagement, and what does the hyperlocal offer? I mean, we're all aware of our 2K and 5K since the pandemic began. So we work hard to establish and maintain our embedded relationships and methodologies with the artists, the partners, the community organisations, and the wider community. And we're really pleased to share some of our work, which is very hard to fit into 20 minutes, over the last 22 years, at an event like Places Matter. We're constantly energised by staying true to the local, the need to research new strategies, and to sustain and grow our relationships as we collectively navigate our way to a constantly changing urban future. In 2003, we established a studio space called Studio 468 in St Andrews Community Centre, Rialto, and more recently, we've established the Lodge in Inchicore. These are physically high-quality spaces and that are managed and programmed by us with others as a modestly funded arts organisation. Through these, we've built several positive relationships. And today you can see some of those where we have examples of citizen artists, the Just City in Kate, and more recently we're pleased to have awarded artist Evelyn Broderick our Radical Imagination Award. It's also important to acknowledge our other programs of work, some of those that took place with children and young people, including music programs like Music for Me, Republic of Sound, Tiny Voices, and our new partnership with Stinging Fly and Fatima Groups United. Studio 468 and the Lodge are really what you could say are local development response to the benefit of arts and cultural work that has taken place around that area for the last 3 decades. It has become a rich resource in the community of Rialto. Studio 468 is in a very dynamic community centre called St Andrews, and as a space it's hosted a wide range of Irish and international artists. It has opened up possibilities for artists in the immediate community to respond to their place and the issues that may affect them on a daily basis. And this is our ambition for the Lodge also. Critically, through the last recession and COVID-19, we have found mutual and critical supports via the Family Resource Centre in Inchicore, the Fatima Groups United, IMA, the F2 Centre and St Andrews Community Centre, and other local community development projects and youth projects. These are all vital and critical to maintaining and expanding our local relationships and augmenting our work. And one thing we did learn in COVID-19 is that we weren't all in this together. We saw this in the fallout of how care homes were left in a seriously challenged mess, how online education became inaccessible for many, and how for older and younger people, isolation was felt even more deeply. Local places, local connections will be stepping into that breach over the next 5 to 10 years as we move in and out of the pandemic. Successful physical spaces like Studio 468 act as a neutral platform that hosts difference and rigorous conversations between local people and the artists on the ground. This is, like I mentioned previously, this is our ambition for the Lodge, and the work that has emerged from Studio 468 has included Kate and Kate and the Just City, Shodine O'Sullivan and Hardgraft, and Mapping Green Dublin, citizen artists and other artists like Fiona Whelan, the emerging art practice of Fiona Whelan Rialto Youth Project and Broken Talkers, filmmaker Anne-Marie Barry and Rialto Twirlers, Pat Curran, and more recently filmmaker Vinnie Murphy and Rialto Community Drug Team, and their film Fatima Was My City. Our work with these artists and projects has expanded our place-based and sited practice substantially and organisationally. And, I suppose, it also builds other structures and grows away from the studio. So for like Kate and Enya and the Just City Collective and the connections that have been built through networks of solidarity, and including the recent submission by the Greening Forum, which formed out of the Mapping Green Dublin project, who also recently submitted to the Dublin Development Plan around change in greening initiatives and public space in Dublin 8. Negotiation is pivotal in our work, listening to differences, balancing needs of the everyday and the work and practices of our partners. We've worked hard to develop strong working relationships behind the many project components you see behind me. This demands investment and time in negotiation, brokering, and mediation. It's complex, and it sets a complex set of questions that's addressed through the work. One thing we have learned is that you have to hold on to your values when you act as an arts organisation. You have to be present to the issues at hand and respond to them, and know when to step in and when to step back. So I'm just thinking about the narratives of place. In Ireland, places are often branded. Carlow was once Sugartown. Other towns were the barracks towns, where they were kind of brought into disrepute because they were seen as bad places. Consequently, we are conscious and alert to how narratives about Dublin 8 are being set and circulated and branded. How a place is viewed is not only essential, but it's essential for ourselves to understand how we're viewed. Dublin 8 is now the city's flagship commodity. A recent article in the Times reported that Dublin 8 is primed for prosperity, alongside 4 other global neighbourhoods. For us, this is an example of disconnect and clash of ideologies and realities between how the cities and urban spaces are being planned and how local people are considered or engaged with. Central to our development of the Just City Award was the prioritisation of questions spatial justice issues, in particular the way in which urban and social fabric of inner city Dublin is currently encountering forms of spatial injustice through the acquisition, development and management of neighbourhood housing, private rented accommodation, build-to-rent and public space. When we formed its brief, it was in resistance to what the city was positioning itself as and the narratives that were surrounding us and being promoted. So finally, I'm thinking about holding on to your value systems. Our work often reflects the contemporary world in ways we could never have imagined, and we are proud to have worked with a rich resource of critical allies, artists and networks. For us, many of those partnerships have moved to alliances. COVID and the economic recession reminds us that we had to act in solidarity with each other. Sometimes we need to say no or make spaces that allow dissent to place discreetly that at the centre of our work or loudly. Now more than ever, people and communities need safe social spaces where they can gather and create. This is more urgent with the impact of COVID-19 and where local people will orientate to the local to make sense of the pandemic in places so that they matter. In closing, I urge us all to consider places of care in relation to our present and future, and in response to a very difficult global situation, including places like Afghanistan, Ukraine, Palestine, and Yemen. It's important that we remember about love, care, and solidarity when looking at how places change and how we invite and care for those who are leaving and those who are entering the place. As Karen Till identifies in the blog series for Social Justice Week, Maynooth, only by working with living communities and local experts can we address past and ongoing forms of injustice to realise healthier and more sustainable communities together. This remains especially important as the UN's 2030 Agenda and its SDGs remain unclear about who decides what's to be sustained by and for whom, including more than human lives, and over what time periods. Also unclear is who is responsible for already existing unjust processes, practices and outcomes that have resulted in unsustainable places, communities, environments and practices and may continue to damage our future relations. If we want to create sustainable communities that support relations for a healthier and less damaging future and are inclusive of inter- and intra-generational multi-species equity, a decolonizing and geographical approach to justice is needed. Reframing UN SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, as well as other SDGs from such an approach means to study and change processes and structures that led to and reinforce injustice. So I'm also thinking about Kathleen Lynch and how she reminds us that love, care, and solidarity, our survival depends on it. Effective inequalities are serious political matters. Human flourishing requires caring and loving. And as Kay Tempest writes, craft is the hard work, connection is the reward. So I now hand over to Kate and Enya, whose immense and considered care and thought created the networks of solidarity as a part of the Just City.
I go first? Yeah. Why do places matter? And what matters when being in a place? What happens when you listen to a place? But what happens when you really, really, really listen to a place? So for me, these are questions of the heart. What happens when a place listens back to you? These are questions of value, value in a world that is upside down. We don't have to look very far to see what the violence of slicing, dividing, cutting, erasing, and boxing off of space, land, ways of life, and people does to the collective heart. So for me, this is the true meaning of networks of solidarity. Lies in the praxis of nurturing spaces that bring the false divisions between the heart and the mind, the intellect and the embodied, the songs and the policies, the land and its silenced histories. So, as two fine Kerry women who have spent many years grappling with cities around the world, Enya and I are here today to share our understanding of networks of solidarity, which comes from the many threads of social relations that we embody. And I just want to say it's so beautiful looking out at this crowd because I can actually see threads from like Limerick and Cork and Dublin and Kerry. And for me, that's like been the magic of the last 2 days. So in particular, we are here to share about a 4-part interconnected series between Dublin 8 and Gadigal country, commonly known as Sydney, Australia. So that we co-organised in 2021 with the support of Common Ground and create the National Development Agency for Collaborative Arts. So while we won't spend too much time discussing what happened in the events, they're all available online and they're fantastic. So rather, we want to make visible the many years and practices of community care and resistance and hearts across continents who we have been lucky enough to work with that work to create the conditions for safe, nurturing and inclusive spaces to come into being. So here are 3 questions for everybody in the audience that I would love you to take with you today. So they are questions that have become part of my everyday. I am fascinated by the power and potential of a question to live and act through us. So sometimes questions are a collective scream that come to the surface at the same time. So how much is enough is the question that I began my journey in Dublin 8 with. It came from a conversation with urban planner Erin O'Brien in Cork as we chatted around a kitchen table, frustrated by the contradictions of how we speak to density in our cities. It also reflects on how much can a community be pushed before it pushes back? How much can a community be pushed before it breaks? How much is enough for any of us? This is the question that I came to Dublin 8 with. So during my 2 years in Dublin 8, I have learnt and felt what an embodied, embedded community practice really is. Through working with community worker, activist, and writer John Bissett, and many community projects with about 74 Zooms a week, I began to embody one of his core questions: who is it for? Which I think really speaks to everything. Who is a place for? Who is anything for? As Gareth Phelan pointed out this morning, who are the contracts for? Who decides? So, finally, where does it come from is my third question, which is a question I was gifted by Dawn Moleski, who I work with in a project called The People's Kitchen in Cork through the Artist and Community Scheme, and who you will hear in a short clip soon. In the context of Dublin 8, this question speaks to the 40 years of community-led organising I have been learning about. But of course, these 40 years I am slowly piecing together through threads from many years before that. And yeah.
I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on Gadigal country. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, water and sky. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded here, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I extend my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and Indigenous or First Nations people that are in this space. My name is Enya Moore, and I feel very privileged to be here today, even if only on screen, and I'm only sorry that I'm not in Carlow in person. To help frame how we have gotten to this shared space, I would like to share a bit of my story. I'm Irish and I was born on Moro country on land stolen from the Noongar people. It was a place that up until recently I only knew as Joondalup or Perth because that's what it said on my passport. I grew up in Kenmare, County Kerry with Kate. It was only when I came back to Australia in 2016 that I came to understand that I was born on stolen land. I now live and work on Gadigal land in what many of you will know as Sydney, as a writer, researcher, and educator. One of the 4 networks of solidarity events through our stories reflected the connection through storytelling that I saw between Ireland and Gadigal country. The practice of storytelling, while diverse in form, is common to different places and to many peoples. Growing up in Kerry, I was well versed in storytelling. Sometimes they were just the stories that we told each other every day. Others were stories embedded in the landscape, myths like Invershkena in Kenmare or the Sleeping Giant in Dingle, connected me to my home and taught me about folklore, language and culture. Language and place names of Kenmare like Nadine or Cianvara taught me about our place in Kerry, in Ireland, and in relation to the rest of the world. We know that language that we use, the words that we reach for, and the accents that we speak with say a lot about us. For me, the significance of storytelling is that it allows people to speak directly to their own experience and their own understanding of the world, and it offers other people the opportunity to listen. Stories connect us, and it's powerful. Since being back in this place called Australia and living on Gadigal country, I have learned a lot through listening to stories, and I'm very grateful to the people who share their knowledge. I've also learned a lot about Ireland and being Irish. For a long time, I thought that being Irish meant being from Ireland and being in Ireland. I realize now that it doesn't just mean those things. As someone who was born in Australia, grew up in Ireland, and has citizenship of these 2 places, I often thought that my experience was unique. I've since come to realize that this story and the connections between Ireland and Gadigal country is in fact a very old story. I left Ireland in 2012, just as we were emerging from recession. At that time, I was living in Dublin 8. I was working in the city centre in a bar, and for me, things looked pretty bleak. Work was very hard to come by, and a lot of people I knew in Dublin had left Dublin. In the words of the Dublin spoken word artist, Emmett Kerwin, as Sydney and London swallow up your mates, any crack? No, you all fucked off. 10% of young Irish people emigrated during the recession, and in 2012 I joined them. Mine and Kate's paths diverged geographically at this point. Kate stayed in Ireland while I left to build a life elsewhere, although we didn't seem to be getting rid of each other. However, we remained close friends, working together over life's highs and lows. And while Kate speaks to learning about 40 years of community organising in Dublin, I've been deeply reflecting and examining my own positionality as an Irish person on stolen land and the connections between my 2 homes. Since living here in this place many know as Australia, it's hard not to notice the stories of Irish people who have been coming here since the famine. Only yesterday I learned about 15 female orphans from my hometown who travelled from Kenmare Workhouse in 1850 to an orphanage in Hyde Park Barracks that I just walked past today. And while Irish people understand deeply the violence of imperialism and colonisation, it is, after all, in many of our stories and songs. We occupy a different position when we move outside of Ireland. In Australia, I am part of settler colonialism. This duality connects me both to Ireland and to Gadigal country. For me, that means listening to and learning from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, who are part of the oldest surviving culture in the world. It means doing what I can to stand in solidarity, in whatever small part, in the face of ongoing colonial violence. In networks of solidarity, that meant learning from, listening to, and working with Gadigal, Bidjigal, and Yuin elder Auntie Rhonda Dixon Grosvenor, who is a traditional knowledge holder, a staunch activist, a generous educator, and a talented artist. My connection with Ireland means remaining connected with the place that it is today and not the place that I remember it to be. Michael D. Higgins, who often speaks of and to the global Irish diaspora, refers to this as ethical remembering and highlights the importance of avoiding sentimentality and nostalgia when remembering to see things as they are. Throughout the Just City project and the Networks of Solidarity series, this has meant listening to people like Rita Fagan and John Bissett, whose voices coming from Dublin 8 continue to challenge structural and systemic violence. It was listening to powerful storytellers like Owen de Vardoon, a folklorist, poet, writer, and activist who shared with us his deep and rich understanding of folklore in the traveller community and shared the ongoing violence perpetrated on the Irish traveller community in a historic and contemporary context. Internationally, Ireland is referred to as a place of 1,000 welcomes, and while it is a really nice thing to be known for and connected with, I know that it's not always a welcoming place. Not only has it not been welcoming, but it has sought to lock people out. This has included people of Ireland, women, LGBTQIA+ communities, travellers, Black and brown people, people with less money and means. It has also included people who come to Ireland in search of shelter, including migrants and refugees. Despite this, I think that the idea of the land of 1,000 welcomes is still a worthy goal and can mean something much more in that it can continuously welcome diverse stories and difficult histories, or what Michael D. refers to as a hospitality of narratives.
So in our imagination, Enya's face was a screen and then the PowerPoint was a screen. So you didn't get any of the slides. But if you could play the video, Colette, that'd be great.
So if you take two places that are pretty far away from each other, Dublin 8 and Sydney, Dawn and Central New York, and lots in between, how do we learn from different practices of community care?
Hello to Auntie Rhonda and all the rest of the people out there. That was a lovely welcome. So I thought I'd put this up on screen. May you see what you see through different eyes. May you hear with different ears. And may you taste what you have never tasted. So we had to go protesting. We had to go with the people. That's the land, beautiful, prime land. And at the moment, we're in the middle of who gets to live on what goes on. So we took to the streets because the people asked us, and we joined with the communities of Devonny Garden, Shamrock Street, and Fairmont Road, Dominic Street, because they were let down and thrown away. They marched and they wanted to save their community plan. And then we used the arts as we went along. We took the model. And we took it, we had the horse and car. There's John Bissett, there's the great Lord John Bissett there, and Mickey Flanagan, and then some ladies who worked under regeneration, and Sinead is there. And we marched the streets of Dublin and to highlight the deaths of the hopes and dreams of those people. Because after that, a lot of people decided to leave the land and just go. Our work is empathy, care, justice, love.
I'd like to thank you, give a thanks to Rita and that beautiful story and sharing, and especially like giving us so much information and knowledge and story about what's happening in her area. And I really like that one that said, whose land is it anyway? So my daughter Nadina, that did the welcome with me, she's got a song called Always Was, Always Will Be Aboriginal Land. It's about history, it's about resilience, it's about the struggle, it's about, still being here.
So my name is Moleski, and I'm an artist that is currently based on unceded Oneida Nation land in rural central New York, but from and born and raised in 30 minutes northeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is on also unceded Lenape and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land. So when I'm creating as an artist and working with so many different people, as you saw from Auntie Rhonda and Rita's presentations, we are always working collectively as activists, as organizers, and as artists. And so oftentimes my work takes the shape of something that doesn't exist in a gallery or museum, and includes the work and co-creation of many, many, many other individuals that come together as a collective.
Yeah, I'm going to play something. Oh, I should also say, this heart for me is something that I've struggled with as a symbol of entitlement and privilege, but it was actually 124 of my friends helped me buy this, and so I see this as a symbol of friendship and also a kind of encouragement to keep making noise.
It's a bit harsh that I've edited this to finish just as she's about to start playing music. You can follow online. If I can get some slides back, that'd be fabulous. Cool, we're going to go through quickly. Look at these lovely slides you could have seen while Enya was talking. Cool, so to speak to, I guess, friendship, and I'm probably slaughtering the threading metaphor, but I'm going with it. So in 2018, I co-published a book called Dirty Words through our publishing house, Dirty Books. And in this, one of the pieces that always sticks with my heart that I talk about is a piece when I asked Gustavo Esteva Figueroa to write about what he thought, he was born in 1936, what is it all about? And in his article, he said, he called it Friendship, Hope and Surprise. And he said, I do believe that if there is something like a political life to remain for us in this life of technology, then it begins with friendship. We need to cultivate disciplined, self-denying, careful friendships, which are today the key, the powerful force, the stuff radiating out of the communal spirit for the rebirth of the commons. And I guess the reason for me this is really important, because within the practice, it's also always trying to make visible the stuff that really makes things work. So with me and Enya, it's not because she's got a fabulous CV. It's because we know each other since we're 4. It's because a teacher trusted us and saw something in us in transition year and said, you're co-editing the first school newsletter, which we called TY High Times. And worryingly, the aesthetic is not that different to what I'm doing now. And when I saw this first, Enya's mother found them, and I was like, God, we were a bit outward thinking, weren't we, presidential elections? But then I realised it's the Leaving Cert, presidential elections, and it's about our Debs night. And the first time me and Enya were in Carlow was in transition year to go from Kerry to the National Ploughing Championships, and we reported on this also. And to say that when I second time round was in Carlow was to work with the poet Sarah Clancy as part of Take Apart Carlow, and we did a workshop on printmaking and spoken word, and there was one particular artist in the group who wrote a poem called Tippix Rebellion, and we talk about it, to this day. And that artist was Clifton Redmond, who you heard earlier today, and just again that thread is so beautiful. And then I was telling Enya this morning, all excited, and she was like, this was like your Microsoft Rebellion, Kate. So this was highly produced in Microsoft Word when we got a computer, and printed on the photocopier in school. So I'm just going to show a couple moments of, for me, what it is all about. So during COVID, I did the AIC Autumn, the Arts and Community, or the Create, I don't know, Autumn School. And there I met Karen from Go Dance for Change, and then through that I started working with Go Dance for Change and Alessandra, who you see in these pictures here, and they became part of Networks of Solidarity, and they were in that. And then in a mad turn of events, we brought the Zapatistas to Ireland, who have been a big inspiration for me for many, many years, who talk about there are many worlds and many worlds fit in this world. And then when they came to Ireland, they did this. They were based in St Andrew's Community Centre in Dublin 8, and the Red Rialto Youth Project bus drove the Zapatistas around Ireland. And it's things like that you can't plan, you can't. It's about being in place, and then it happens. And there we are in the West, in Galway. So where are we now? Where's it all going? Who knows? Just to speak a little to like the relationships that built and the strength of relationships. And I guess I work every day with the community worker John Bissett, who now Enya works with. And then when Enya came back to Ireland, we finally got her home after 2 years. And this is her on the Dublin 8 tour with John Bissett. And it's just that magic and that meeting of minds that it's all about. Enya Moore, who has the community Radio Skid Row in Sydney, was on the Airwaves Networks of Solidarity with Anla, who has Rebel Matters, and they both couldn't believe that they both had grown up, one in Belfast, one in Sydney, with parents who started radio stations, and with that had like a mega bond, and now there's a podcast on Rebel Matters between the two of them. So this is Studio 468, and this is kind of just to show, it's like I'm always talking about how everything's interconnected, but that's when Enya finally came, that's Enya meeting Ali, and then it's just, this is how the things happen. So that's, Fanula and Raphael, who we did on the airwaves, they were like, will you chair this panel and connect it in? And then the fabulous Evelyn Broderick, who is here and is the next artist in residence, and then she will make the place her own thing, but then there's always this threading. So I think, how am I, an artist in Dublin 8 who is building off a legacy for a very long time? Artists like Alva Murphy and Rita Fagan, artists like Fiona Whelan, who worked with Jim Lawler, and then and all these stories, so you build on this legacy all the time. Am I nearly out of time? Oh yeah. This speaks to just one of my favourite moments was when the Zapatistas were coming to Ireland, and a friend of mine, Maren DeBarra, who used to organise the Limerick Spring, she messaged me, and we hadn't talked in a couple of weeks beforehand, and she was like, oh, I did a film 22 years ago between the Sail Project, which I work with in Dublin 1, and another group of women in Chiapas, and it was about when through a military attack, this mural had been destroyed, and then the group in Dublin recreated that mural, and couldn't write it. So, and then when we had the Zapatistas, and I was in the community centre, and there was about gender-based violence, and there was Rita Fagan, who was telling the Zapatistas about the history of her work in the Family Resource Centre, and then you had Daniel McKenna now speaking in terms of the Rialto Youth Project, and drawing together work by like Fiona Whelan and the Natural History of Hope, and then we translated that into Spanish, and this is just to give you a feeling of what really ticks me boxes. So here is, so it's all constantly, I think, the question that keeps coming up, over the last couple of days, and really just, I got so much nourishment out of the Creative Places Tume session yesterday, and the incredible socially engaged filmmaker David, who was talking about, the potential, what is it? So it's this potential of art to just dissolve and break down the boundaries and the walls of who is it for. So, so going on from here, it's all one project, the whole thing. So this will take me till the end, I'd say. How much is enough.online is going to be, there's not much on it now, but that's the idea, is to continue building a platform for radio, print, and whatever you have on yourself. I got awarded the Create Bursary for Collaborative Arts and Community Development, which will allow me the time to reflect on, I guess, the last 12 years. And we're going to go back to Enya. I love saying that. Over to Sydney. It's like the Eurovision.
In October 2020, American literary critic and Black feminist scholar Hortense Spillers recalled the 1960s as a moment for change, particularly in relation to academia, and suggested that since then, the idea of combining theory and praxis has fallen away. She states, "We need wait no longer for a crisis to inspire renewal. We're up to our necks in crises, but how will we respond?" And after being at the school strike for climate change, school strike for climate, earlier today, and listening to a 13-year-old from Lismore in northern New South Wales speak of how she lost her home, her school, her chickens, and was worried that she'd also lost her friends in the recent floods. I know that we don't need to wait any longer for any more crises. As a way of responding to the Spillers' call for action, a core idea I came away with from networks of solidarity and the research projects I was working on at the same time is an ethics of encounter. That is, a critical position that situates the organizer, writer, or author, or in these cases it was me, in the multiple legacies of transnationalism, geocultural powers, and counter-hegemonies, and responds to them as a form of responsibility to the encounter, or even a hospitality or ethical remembering. This establishes the significance in acknowledging positionalities to avoid claims of universal ways of knowing or being, and critiquing dominant political, economic, and cultural hegemonies. To finish, I just want to share with you the epilogue from my thesis, which I wrote just after Networks of Solidarity, in the form of a vignette or a little window into my mind, which seems pretty appropriate as I'm a giant window on the screen right now. It will then show her epilogue for time in Dublin 8. So it is July 2021 and we are in lockdown. I'm getting ready for the fourth and final online event in a series I co-organised with Kate, my friend, artist and activist. We constructed the events together across long and winding conversations with artists, architects, activists, community workers, educators, academics, family and friends over the course of the last year during the global pandemic. As an event, it is wildly different from many of the ones that I encountered during my fieldwork. Firstly, it is not framed by design, and secondly, there are no claims to the universal. It does, however, share some approaches with counter-hegemonic events I encountered. All that is presented at these events is deeply place-based and addresses shared struggles and resistance. In connecting to the notion of solidarity, we found a place online that was warm and open, while also critical and challenging. Instead of creating a smooth, glossy narrative, we searched for alternatives.
Struggle and joy, peace and war, hope, grief and anger do not obey timelines. Every struggle for a more just world is threaded with all the struggles that have gone before. In Dublin 8, I am simply a point on a very, very long map of the intersection of community development, art and activism. There should be many books on this rich history of socially engaged art in Dublin 8, and someday there will be. I have been transformed by the legacy of those who have gone before me and by the people I have collaborated with over the past many years. Thank you very much.
So I'd just like to say a very great thanks to Enya Moore from coming in from Gadigal land, to Kate O'Shea and to yourselves, and we really appreciate you being here and being present to this conversation about why places matter.